Chapter 2. I was a feminist. At the turn of the millennia, I had the unique opportunity to complete 2 semesters of one of my undergraduate degrees as an exchange student in the United States of America, US. By way of background, I completed a triple undergraduate degree and master's in business administration, but during my time in the US, my studies were primarily focused on the Bachelor of Management (BM) units. As per any undergraduate degree, there are several core subjects that are compulsory. Within a BM at my home university in Australia, one core subject amongst others was Women in Organizations. Prior to the exchange, I spent considerable time with my course convener in Australia ensuring the classes in which I was enrolling in the US would be of equivalent suitability to meet the requirements of a BM in Australia. Together, my course convener and I cited and agreed that women's studies offered in my future US university was a suitably equivalent core subject to the Australian version of Women in Organizations. It was very clear I could not graduate without completing this class. So, it's my first week at a prestigious university in the USA and I'm going through the administrative function of enrolling in all my subjects for the semester ahead. While this is typically done online these days, back then, meeting the lecturer, particularly when you're an exchange student, was the norm. Semester 1 in the US for me required enrollment in 3 subjects. The first 2 were straightforward, whilst the third, women's studies, was somewhat different. As I attempted to enroll in a gender studies class, I was ironically stopped because of one problematic reason beyond my control: my gender. I arrived in high spirits, excited to have the opportunity to study and learn in the US. The expression on the face of my to-be teacher, a lesbian in her mid to late 50s, said it all. I wasn't welcome in her class. Before any formalities whatsoever, the first question she asked with a condescending tone of suspicion was, "Are you a feminist?" This was the first time I had ever been asked this question. Concurrently, as a young and naive student at the time, I was confused as I thought that the word feminism was purely about females. As such I answered, "I actually consider myself more of an equitist." Immediately the lecturer corrected me and made it clear that feminism was not about women, but rather entirely about being equal. Once she had made her point clear, she then went on to ask, "Why do you want to do this class?" Somewhat thrown back, as it was the first and only time in any course at any level in any country I had been asked to justify why I was enrolling in a subject, I explained that the class was compulsory for me to complete my first of 3 degrees. After I presented notes from my Australian course convener to justify my right to education, so to speak, she reluctantly accepted my explanation. Concurrently, noting being treated fairly and equitably is what I had thought was normal, I gladly accepted her definition of feminism, and boom, on that day I learned I was as a feminist. I discovered that apparently, feminism is equally good to men and women, thus I naturally identified as a feminist. In doing so I was allowed into the club, class. But not before some further screaming. The lecturer then went on to say quite bluntly, "You need to know this class isn't a place to meet women." Shocked and a little insulted for being objectified as predator based only on my gender, I brought out the Aussie sarcastic humour in an attempt to defuse the awkwardness of her rude allegation and marginalisation by jokingly replying, "Ma'am, I'm a 6'3" single-quote athletic rugby-playing Australian surfer on exchange at an American university dominated by females. I can assure you, I don't need to enroll in a class meet women." Not surprisingly, it went down like a lead balloon, and I quickly learned the sense of humor of the feminist. Nothing was funny anymore. Joking about anything is sexist and misogynistic unless it involved degrading men, especially the white ones. In such cases, sexist and racist jokes are hilarious, justified and encouraged under the moral high ground that is feminism. Having eventually made it through the screening reserved for my type of human, straight white male exchange students, I was allowed to enroll as the only male apparently in the history of the subject at this particular university. At the time, I remember feeling, or being made to feel, as though I was doing something wrong or perverse for simply enrolling in a subject at university. That is, according to this highly paid female academic, only women could learn about gender, whilst men had no place in either gaining from or contributing to the subject. It made no sense to me at the time, but as the class progressed, it became clearer. Gender studies at Western universities had nothing to do with education, and everything to do with indoctrination. Evidently, it's far harder to indoctrinate straight white men, particularly when the ideology seeks to make them the enemy. In hindsight, I now realize it was only my nationality that really got me into the class. That is, it's foreseeable that there could have been a minor international incident if it were known that an Australian exchange student was not allowed to complete a subject in the US, hence his entire first degree, because he didn't identify as female. At a minimum, I would have had to approach the university's management if I were denied access, as there were no other classes available or applicable to my major. That, in turn, would have caused administrative difficulties for the university in two countries, so perhaps letting the foreigner in was the easiest option at the time. Ultimately and ironically, I had to lean on my minority status to be allowed to gain an education. The absurdity of it all. According to feminism, minorities in the first world are constantly oppressed, yet had I not been a minority in this instance, I genuinely believe I would have been denied the chance to learn, simply because I was different to the teacher's gender and or heterosexual preference. Anyway, first impressions aside, my first semester of women's studies was an amazing eye-opener in which every man or woman should have the chance to participate. By week 2 into my indoctrination into the world of the feminist, I remember thinking, wow, I truly knew none of this stuff. I can't believe anyone would take steps to exclude half the population from this knowledge. If anything, this class should have more men in it than women. We all have so much to learn. This class is amazing. The course was deep and powerful. Initially, it was my favorite subject of the semester, if not my entire tertiary education to that point. There were no desks, computers, projectors or whiteboards, just students and a lecturer sitting in a circle talking and bonding together. Every class would start with checking in, where each student would talk briefly about whatever they liked, including thoughts, feelings, experiences or anything of interest that had occurred since our last lesson. Each student could express their feelings about anything. It did not need to be related to gender studies in any way. We were all just free to be heard, and in a way loved. I had never experienced this type of learning, especially at a university level, but it made me feel safe, warm, smart and part of something bigger and better than myself. It was truly fantastic. And I was immensely proud to identify as a feminist. The cause of feminism was just and valid. We were studying an important topic with an undeniably good intent. Learning about first and second wave feminism at the beginning of the course instilled the fact that we were becoming part of a holistically perfect movement. I looked forward to our sessions and read every prescribed book from beginning to end, fascinated and motivated the whole way. The semester started as a highly intelligent and non-emotive exploration of the legitimate gender and racial inequalities within our societies of the past that had been tackled in the first and second waves of feminism. Religion, immigration, homosexuality, and culture were also woven into the discussions as correlations between black slavery, women doing housework, sexual liberation, and its alleged enemy of the almighty patriarchy was linked. I felt so lucky to be allowed to learn the history of the feminist movement and enlightened to discover the seemingly ridiculous inequalities of the past. Such inequalities endured by women and consequently men, directly or indirectly, included banning women from accessing contraception, education, employment, the right to vote, the right to deny sexual consent to husbands, protection from sexual harassment and domestic violence, the right to abortion and more. All were legitimate points of history that I genuinely believe all men and women should seek to understand within the context of the tradition, religious beliefs, technology, economics and medical advancements relevant to those periods in time. Beyond learning the course content of a women's studies class, I had the exceptionally scarce opportunities to see things I had never considered. 3 classes a week, up to 2 hours at a time, topped with several field excursions to women's shelters, female stand-up comedian shows, female artist exhibitions, vegan restaurants, teaching in poor black neighborhoods around Los Angeles, and our own reading of the vagina monologues, an almost biblical text to feminism at the time, to an open audience taught me so much in such a short time. Whilst I remember the teacher actively banning me from participating in the public reading of the vagina monologues, because I didn't have a vagina, I was so supportive of the class and its mantra. I was completely blinded to its slowly emerging hypocrisy, hate and marginalization. Together, as something more than just a class at school, we had adventures and endless discussions about the writings and research of predominant feminists who had gone before us. Further to the tertiary studies of feminist literature, we explored and shared our feelings and fears about everything. It resulted in an immense bond amongst the group. We were one, and as such, we thought and behaved like one, forever looking to our leader, the teacher, for her moral assurance of what she preached was right and she labeled as was wrong. She was our great leader, and we were her loyal followers. In retrospection, I see how this was the first part of the indoctrination process. I belonged to something much bigger than myself, and everyone cared about me, just as I cared about them. It sounds weird even to me as I write this, but we really had become a very close family within such a short time. Even as a confident young man on exchange with countless new friends and options, the class was so righteous and just, I wanted to belong to it with everything that I had. I see now just how easy one could be taken away by it, also entirely if lacking the confidence and security of an alpha, sigma, omega male or female. I see how its power could be amplified on a young person away from home, typically for the first time, desperately trying to fit in and gain friends. I see how for anyone who is unsure, hurt, angry, alone or scared could and would take great comfort in being part of a class like this. A class that was part of an even bigger movement comprising of even more righteous feminists fighting together to obtain the moral high ground. We were comforted by both the prescribed readings and guidance of the lecturer, the content of the course, and the belief that anything to do with supporting the minorities under the banner of feminism was a good thing that could never be questioned in any way by anyone at any time. After all, if feminism is about fighting for both genders and being fair, how could anyone possibly have a problem with it? Disturbingly, however, as the weeks went on, I saw the logical student devolve into something that was neither moral nor nice, let alone logical or reasonable. As previously described, the class started as a highly informative and intellectual discussion on the legitimate inequalities during the early 1900s. I was so fortunate to be part of a group of young intellectuals discussing such powerful issues. Sadly, however, by about month 2 and 70 years forward on history's timeline of feminism, I observed an unambiguous and significant shift from intellect and reason to emotion and anger. A shift from history and solutions to fictitious stories and revenge. It was as catastrophic as it was tragic. Inevitably, the emotion and anger fueled by the self-proclaimed man-hating lesbian lecturer herself morphed the class's purpose from facts and logic to hate and retaliation. Essentially, the message changed from "let's see how far we've come, women are empowered" to "we are more oppressed than ever and men are sexist pigs who must pay. We must fight the white patriarchy." The more time went on, the more the anger and hate grew, and consequently, the less I, the now clearly identified enemy, was allowed to have an opinion or even ask a question. Apparently being a feminist now meant hating men, all men, even the good ones and especially the white ones. Thus I wondered if there was an expectation on me to hate myself because of my gender and color. At the beginning of the course, I had complete freedom to talk within what I now recognize more accurately as a safe space. Sadly, the complete shift of the class's intent and direction resulted in me being viewed by my peers as an outsider, despite having been part of the class from day one, and even though I was the actual minority, gender and nationality, in both the class and entire university. I was confused. It started about treating everyone as an individual and being fair, yet I was now being treated as a collective, marginalized for being different, and blamed for things that happened decades before even my grandfather was born. This wasn't the first time I had been treated differently because of my gender or nationality. Having lived in Spain for a year at age 19, I regularly endured racial slurs and poor treatment at school, back in the dorms, on the streets or whilst shopping, all because of my nationality. The British and the most popular people in Spain, and I was continually labelled as being British because of how I looked. Further, whilst working for the government in South Korea for nearly 2 years, it was made very clear to me in an unashamed discussion with my manager, I could not and would not be promoted because I was white ever. Having worked also in female-dominated education systems, I was not and am not unfamiliar with being treated adversely because of my color or gender. The thing that floored me in the women's studies class in the US is that, unlike my other life experiences of enduring racism or sexism, this class was allegedly specifically designed to teach inclusion. Both the brand of feminism and the teacher implied that women's studies and feminism aimed to end all inequalities, yet here we were, willingly and knowingly participating in sexist conduct to actively ensure inequalities. I began to wonder, is this really about bringing us together or forcing us apart? Is it about inclusion or exclusion? Is this what feminism really looks like? Many of the subjects we now studied seemed to contradict themselves. At first, I was comfortable raising some of the points that seemed to be overlooked. For example, without the actions of men in first and second waves of feminism, the movement could never have got off the ground. Even the original suffragettes acknowledged this pertinent point repeatedly. I recall one case study where the Western men had created the contraceptive pill, but the olden day government did not yet make it legally available to women, mainly due to predominantly Christian social beliefs by both women and men at the time. Risking life, limb and liberty, white men would illegally design, manufacture and import these medicines specifically for women for free through maritime drops at night. Rowing out into the sea in complete darkness, more men would search for and recover the floating deliveries that had been previously cached by other men supporting the feminist movement. This case study, and many more like it, helped me in supporting the cause, as it showed how countless good men had been part of enabling the feminist movement from day one. For whatever reason, our class did not, would not and could not acknowledge the contributions of men. That wasn't to be part of the curriculum or discussion, because it humanized an enemy that was intended to marginalize all white men. Another case study of many we explored was presented as a good thing for feminism. However, I was again, fueled by logic and reason, the first and only student to question the hypocrisy of its meaning. Madam C.J. Walker was an amazing entrepreneur that beat all the odds the world and stacked upon her shoulders. Born to 2 former slaves in 1876 in the U.S., she rose from poverty to be the first black female millionaire. Whilst she is famous for this and her invention of the first hair straightening formula, primarily, if not almost entirely used by black women, the real achievement in both my and the class's opinion was that of her empowerment of poor black women through opportunity, education, and employment. Amid the success of her product and business practices, Madam Walker employed, trained and educated thousands upon thousands of black women across America, lifting generations out of poverty and creating an unimaginable opportunity for these women and their families. It's truly an inspirational story in the advancement of oppressed women that genuinely inspires me to this very day. So, where's the hypocrisy in this in the context of feminism? Well, not that I have a problem with it, but the double standard lies the product itself. Just 1 week earlier, the class had gone deep into the murky world of white people allegedly forcing black people to be whiter, particularly with respect to female beauty. Feminist theory clearly showed that black women straightening their hair or lightening their skin was ostensibly a part of white oppression over black minorities. Moreover, the same theory screams that any beauty practices or expectations of women are a direct result of women being exploited and oppressed by white men. Yet 1 week later, the class was learning about and glorifying a black woman who made millions off women, mainly black women, straightening their hair and investing their lives into the beauty industry, an industry that we were just taught was an oppressive objectification forced onto all women by privileged white men. In this example, there were neither men nor whites involved in any part of the story. This case study was fed to us as empowering and liberating, even though it was in an industry counter to the feminist movement. This is where I could begin to see one of the first and most pertinent rules of fourth-wave feminism. Rule 1, there are two standards, one for white men and another for everyone else. When I pointed out the contradiction, the teacher quickly brushed it aside, proclaiming I had missed the point. Whilst I felt I understood her point entirely, that is, it's an amazing story of female empowerment that inspires any person who understands even the very basics of slavery, business and feminism, she refused to acknowledge my point of a double standard that was permissible only if the entrepreneur of a beauty product was black and or female. This is where the monster that is third and fourth wave feminism first popped up and showed me its illogical head.